Welcome to our pod. By that, I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who usually do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we are three friends. Three best friends, because we have C.M. Caplan on to discuss their book, The Fall Is All There Is. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
It is a post-apocalyptic science fantasy. There's a lot of cross-genre stuff going on. Mm-hmm. It is about an autistic royal quadruplet named Peter Mercy, who is sort of the black sheep of the family who runs away when he turns 18. Then 5 years later, his dad dies, and since they're quadruplets, there's a royal succession that they have to sort out. There's a lot of family drama, sibling rivalry, and also weird wetware technology like cyborg horses and swords with batteries made of human thyroid, and just weird trees with animal limbs and things like that.
I loved it when they got bison burgers off of a tree and you talked about how it was like fur and meat. That was perfect.
Oh my God. That was only there like a couple weeks before I published, because Quenby Olson read it. And originally I just had like eating regular food, and Quen like DM'd me to be like, this needs to be weirder. This is too normal for this book. You have to make it something stranger. This doesn't work. And I was like, you're right.
They have cyborg horses that they're riding on and can see all their innards and everything. So yeah, they can't just eat a regular burger. Yeah. They got to have something more out there.
And they're trying not to breathe in ghosts. Like, this book is so unique in its premise and world building. So I love a good bison tree. Why wouldn't you have one there?
Yeah, I'm so glad I put that in there.
Well, to get into the book, like, what inspired this book? Because like you said, it's like post-apocalyptical, it's fantasy, it's sci-fi. It has like all the genres blended in such a very unique way. So what brought this idea to you?
A lot of it did not come at once. For like especially a lot of the weirdest elements came in like the last few months before publication. From like I started putting in a lot of the weird stuff that everyone comments on around like May of 2022, and the book came out in November. So that was when all the weird shit came in, because that was my last pass, and I realized like, okay, there's a lot that someone had read a previous draft and said, I really like the cyborg horses because those were there since day one, and they wanted to see more of that, because they were like, it seems like you have this really cool concept, but it doesn't really that technology doesn't seem to permeate the world very much. So I'm like, okay, so I have this weird fusion of tech and biology. Can I just make the rest of the world sort of echo that kind of theme? So that's where a lot of the weird shit came from. The idea of two apocalypses was something I imported from a previous book that I had written in 2019 as a thesis before, when I graduated college with a degree in creative writing. And then that book I didn't finish. I didn't end up finishing that one, but I stole a lot of those ideas and shoved them in there, because I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get back to that one. So let's just take the stuff I think that works and put it in this, because I think it can really work there. Originally, the main sort of seed of an idea came from The Lion in Winter. Are either of you familiar with that?
No.
It is a play by, if I'm remembering correctly, it is the brother of William Golding. I hope I'm getting the last name right.
I just pulled it up, and it's James Goldman is the playwright.
Goldman, yeah. It's the brother of the dude who wrote The Princess Bride.
Oh, okay.
And it is a play about like Henry II, and like it's almost entirely takes place on like Christmas Eve, where Henry II is taking Eleanor out of prison to celebrate Christmas, and Eleanor of Aquitaine, and the three princes, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, are all just sort of plotting schemes. The King of France is coming. It is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I saw there was a movie with it with one of the guys who plays James Bond. I'm blanking on it.
Peter O'Toole, Katharine Hepburn. Yeah, it has quite a few people.
Star-studded cast. It's insanely good. I watched it for the first time in 2015 and I was like, if I ever write something like that, I could die happy, because the dialogue is just gorgeous, and it's witty, it's quick, it has these very slow moments of like emotional turmoil that can be really subtle and understated. It's just chef's kiss in every single way. And I'd never even attempted to do anything with royals before, because it was just so, I knew if I ever did anything with royals, it would try to ape something like that, and I didn't think I was good enough to ever do something like that for the longest time. And then after I published Sword in the Street, I just kind of, my relationship to that book was kind of complicated, and I wanted to do the polar opposite of that in as many different ways as I can. So I was like, instead of focusing on poor people, let's do about as rich as you can possibly get. And I was like, this is sort of, the original seed of it was basing a lot of the drama on sibling rivalries, and making I'm trying to figure out how to put this. I figured I read around the same time I was getting these ideas, I read the Bitch Queen trilogy by Kei Vioso, and that sort of wait, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just like, okay, I was just reinforcing.
Oh,
so
okay. So that sort of cemented the idea to me that there's this idea of the personal is political, and the idea of someone who is like royalty or nobility sort of cements that idea of like, that is the ethos of that idea of like, it's literally just someone with ungodly amounts of power who their petty conflict can just sort of shape thousands of people's lives, and how weird and fucked up that is. And so that was sort of the idea of like the how I wanted to approach it. And then I knew that I wanted to do something like The Lion in Winter. I spent like a couple weeks brainstorming just a bunch of different weird things about the world. Originally, they weren't quadruplets. Originally, I was going more of a this is a bastard son from the perspective of what is it, Robin Hobb. With that, I took that kind of idea with it. And then eventually I realized, like, wait a minute, I'm a quadruplet. People can't claim that's unrealistic if I write it. I've got the market cornered there. So I switched it up, and immediately everything started falling into place much more vividly, where I'm like, okay, this feels much less like I'm aping a bunch of different styles, and it's becoming much more cohesive. And that was sort of how a lot of it came together from a bunch of different influences.
So a huge portion of this book, as you mentioned, is the family dynamics, and I loved how layered they all were, where it's like the relationship between these siblings is different between these siblings, and it's different with these ones, and they're viewed differently and affect people differently throughout the book. Like a relationship between Edgar and Peter could be seen as this way by them, but another way by a different character, and it could have a different effect on each character that you come across. And I was just kind of wondering how you were able to kind of create all these different and unique family dynamics.
Some of it is experience. A lot of I don't want to get too into my time growing up, just because I don't know who's going to listen to this or anything, but like a lot of people end up thinking, this is something I incorporated into the book, because the book is not as personal as a lot of people would expect from the amount of traits I share with the main character. But one of the things that I did import was this idea of a lot of people think growing up as a quadruplet is very different from having other kinds of siblings. And it's really just like, they're just the same age as you, and people seem to assume that things reflect on them. Like the things you do will reflect on the other three. And that was the original sort of idea of how I wanted to build this sort of out in how these people have relationships with each other. And then I think the rest of it came through from I needed Peter to be an unreliable narrator, just because of but you're really in his head. So I needed ways to demonstrate that like there's more depth to a lot of these people, or there's things he's not picking up on but he can't say it because you're so deep in his head for most of the book, or for all of the book, that I was having trouble figuring out how to demonstrate a lot of those layers. And so a lot of those layers I realized came from other people. Like mostly because, again, from experience, a lot of people, like I can have the same relationship with some people, and then Or I can have a relationship with someone. It doesn't even have to be familial. I can have a relationship with like a partner, and then I will talk to someone about a conversation I had with them, and someone will be like, "Whoa, what? I can't believe they said that." And like it was, they were making a joke. Like, what the hell, man? Like, why? It's not a big deal. And they're like, "No, that's really uncool. I can't believe it." And it's like, I've had a lot of those moments where I was like, I need to. This person's clearly bringing something to this situation that has that a perspective that's completely different from how I was coming at it, and we're clearly not seeing eye to eye on this. And that was the sort of kind of interactions I wanted to bring to it, to demonstrate that like when Peter's talking about a lot of his family and how he's very different from them, and sort of there are ways in which that's true, and there are ways in which he's either not giving himself enough credit or he's giving himself too much credit. And I needed, and a lot of those other characters, I needed to have those opinions in order to demonstrate, like clue people into like the things that he's not noticing about himself or others.
Sure.
There's something I super enjoy about listening to Peter's POV, and it's like when he's interacting with someone, there a lot of times in books there's like the miscommunication trope, but like Peter's is way more in your face because he's willing to tell you exactly what he thinks is happening in a conversation, even if it's like blatantly wrong from the other person's perspective. And like I think that's where your unreliable narrator like shows in the perfect way, because I just loved how many conversations where he's like, oh, these people have to talk around the issue so much, I'm going to tell them directly what I think. And it's like he's only telling them in his head what he thinks. He's not actually having the conversation, and he's also talking around the issue as well, but he thinks he's being more in your face about it. And I just enjoyed that so much with how he sees the world.
Oh, it was so much fun.
Well, trust is actually like a big theme in this book, really, though, because you have Peter who's constantly like, I can't believe you don't trust me. I can't believe you don't trust me. But then we as readers put a lot of trust in Peter, only to be like, what the hell? We can't trust you, Peter.
Yeah, Desmond ended up, I think, being a lot of the voice for trust in a lot of key scenes. Mm-hmm. I think there's a scene in which Peter is trying to walk out, like around the first time he's meeting with Desmond, and I think that was another very late edition that proved to be critical. Where it's like, wait a minute, hang on, you're walking out. I would like talk to Peter as I'm writing it, be like, you are walking out of here because you can't, because he's not trusting you. But you are not at all trusting any of the people around you either. Like, what the fuck? And I was like, I need to have someone to voice this, because holy shit, he's so righteous in his head about a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate it. And like it's unique, it's your unique perspective about the fact that you're like, yeah, I was a quadruplet and everyone expects it to be a special relationship instead of just like any other sibling relationship with a very specific type of uniqueness where you guys are all the same age at the same time and going through the same like growth spurts and everything. Yeah. But I really enjoyed Peter and Desmond's relationship specifically because it shows like how you can have a sibling who totally gets you on a fundamental level and you can dislike them the most out of the group. And like it's a very unique sibling dynamic, and I wonder like what kind of brought that on, and how did you play with their relationship a little bit more to show like a unique perspective on what siblings can be?
Man, I actually have to think of that, because Desmond and Peter were a scene with them was the first thing I ever wrote, and a lot of that came very naturally. So I never really had to. I had to make some very intentional choices throughout, like what I talked about with like the promise and everything. But a lot of it was they'd have these interactions, and then I'd have to go back in a later draft and be like, okay, hang on now, why did you say that? We need to figure out what this says about you, that you thought that this was an okay thing to say, or that you're doing this. And a lot of that was like I'd already written it, and then it was archaeology. I had to do like thematic archaeology on my own book to figure out why these people were having these opinions. I think this is part of where I think a lot of people will think that this came from experiences with siblings, but a lot of that sort of stuff with like someone who really gets you, who you don't have a good relationship with, has come from like a ton of different areas in my life. I've had times where like I have some relationships with a couple siblings who like there are times in our lives where we've really got each other and we've really gotten along because of that. And sometimes it's like it's one of those things where it's like the people who know you the best also have the best idea of how to hurt you.
Mhm.
And I don't. And again, this isn't a situation that's unique to my siblings. I have this with like a ton of different people where it's like I know this person really well, and if we're getting along, we're getting along. But then like at the same time, if if you know that person really well, it's also like if you're in a mood where you're really petty, there's a moment where I don't know if this is a universal thing, but every now and then, if I'm if I'm in a bad mood or something, I'm not gonna like say something, but it's just sort of like I could be really petty to you right now in a way that I know you're not going to like, and it's just going to be really cutting and horrible, and I don't want to be that person, but I could do that. And a lot of it comes from that, the idea of like taking the parentheses off of that kind of interaction, where it's like I had to give a lot of these characters permission to be their worst selves, just because they can be, because what the fuck is anyone else going to do about it?
Whereas, well, I think they have a little more openness to do so because of their position as like, royalty too. Whereas if these were people of a lower status, I feel like we probably wouldn't be in this situation at all, because what is there to fight over? What is there to be all worked up about? We wouldn't be in this situation.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah, they're just like they have such immense power and privilege, and especially with like the way that their dad and their mom were, they had a lot of it, I think, was them aping what they were seeing. And there was not really anyone around to like, no one's going to be like, hey, you can't talk to him that way, because those people have a lower social status. Whereas like, if I want to say something really, really petty to someone I care about, I also know that like, okay, I'm going to have to deal with the fallout of that. And that's going to be pretty fucked up. And I don't want to be that person. But like with these people, you can say whatever the fuck you want to whoever the fuck you want. And you don't always have to really deal with the consequences, because a lot of your power and privilege sort of shields you from that.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the parents, like we kind of discussed that the dad has died at the beginning of this novel. He's been dead for a while, but we do get to meet the mom throughout this story, and she's like the more scientific one. She's a lot more calculating. But the sections on her were so beautiful, because I don't know if I've ever seen like a better portrayal of like what it's like dealing with a narcissist with the way Peter treats her. Like that's what came through to me. Like this woman has probably some bouts of narcissism in her, and the way he's like, I have to make her feel wanted. I have to make her feel like she's helping me, or else like this isn't going to go well for me, and she's going to take away resources from me if I make the wrong move. And I wonder like how you dealt with those sections and how you dealt with his mother as a character, because she was like the most messed up, and she's the one we heard about the
and
most.
Also
like
terrifying.
Yeah, like she's terrifying.
Yeah. Oh, she's one of my favorites. I tried to fit her into so many more scenes, because she I think only has like the one really. And I tried to make it as pointy as I could, because there were so many different scenes with her that I had to cut. She was the toughest character to figure out as well. Her situation, like her whole relationship with Peter, I think Peter does a lot of, I'm going to crowbar myself apart from Peter here. I'm throwing him under the bus. He has, because his relationship with her is so fraught, I think a lot of times he's leading you to a specific conclusion about her that doesn't always line up with the way she or other people might see her. A lot of her behaviors and the way she needs to interact with him is basically because of in my head, the way I was trying to get it down was like, this is a woman who is arguably in one of the least powerful situations you could ever be. She was like married to like a 43-year-old when she was 17 against her will, and then the second she tries to get out of it, she's locked in a basement for the rest of her life. And it's just sort of like for a while she was like cartoonishly evil in a lot of previous drafts, and then I was like, no, that's too mean. I can't do that. This person has been through way too much to make her like this cartoonishly horrible. But she still couldn't like I still knew she had to really be controlling because that's the only avenue she has in her life for control. And so and Peter is not like, number one, a lot of his reaction to the stuff that's happened to her is just sort of like, he doesn't really care about a lot of it because number one, it was a lot of it was before he was born. And then a lot of it is just the way society can treat women. And then a lot of it is just sort of like, fuck it, she hurt me. Why should I care about it? But there's still, because that relationship is so fraught, he still has to navigate. Like, she's a woman who's in a lot of pain, and this is the only sort of way she has to exercise a lot of that. But that still means it's a very dangerous thing for Peter to have to navigate. Like, I don't want to like diminish a lot of the shit that she's doing because it is messed up, and she like how even just the way the book begins, like there's just
no, well, and I think maybe I'm being too harsh on her too, because I'm just trusting in Peter's perspective too much. Because I think you do show that like this is a woman who's been through so much, and she has been hurt in a lot of ways. And I also think like it's a good line because like you can be hurt and you can have empathy for a person who's been hurt that way, but you can also recognize like, and it doesn't excuse her reaction to the way she was doing it, because she is just taking it out on her children. And there are moments where like you can tell she doesn't care that much about Peter because their relationship is fraught. So she's like, oh, I've walked away from that. Like, and you're just like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, she comes off as so cold at times, though, that it was just like really hard for me to. I know you're supposed to sympathize with her, but I just couldn't do it at times, especially when she was like talking about the injections. This will fix your autism. I'm like, no.
Yeah. No, to be clear, you are not meant to sympathize with her at all. A lot of the sort of outside the text sort of perspective on her is coming in later books, at least if everything goes to plan. But a lot of this is like, Peter has not necessarily interrogated his relationship to his mom, and his mom is just horrible to him, like just the worst kind of things that you can imagine a kid going through. He had to endure with her and everything. So like, you're not meant to like her because Peter doesn't like her, and Peter's not thinking about it, and like a lot of the stuff she does is like inexcusably bad. Even, and it's like you don't want to just be like, I had a traumatic childhood, like that doesn't make it okay. But that is like a critical sort of part of why she acts the way she acts.
So I think in this book there are injections that Peter gets, and we find out that they help him to have some physical advances, and also like they affect his brain chemistry as well, it seems. And I'm just kind of wondering how this all ties into Peter's autism.
A lot of that was, I want to say personal, but again, I feel like I need to put an asterisk on that. Like, my family was not putting me on weird fucking chemicals that control my body or anything like that. But I was a problem child growing up because of autism. And I was acting out a lot, and so a lot of that was, and since I was growing up in the 90s and everything, not in the 90s, in the early 2000s, I was born in the 90s, grew up in the early 2000s, and I was put on like Adderall and Klonopin at like first and second grade. And I'm still taking a lot of that medication. And that was a sort of thing that I wanted to sort of navigate the idea of with especially kids who are diagnosed at a very early age, who are acting out. A lot of the frontline treatment is to medicate that. And one of the problems, and this is not to specifically indict my family or anything like that, like this is a much more structural thing that happens to a lot of people with autism, is like the frontline treatment is to medicate it and make it go away insofar as it affects other people. Like, and again, I feel like I have to be clear because I am sort of talking about my personal life here. My family was paying for therapy and shit. They were not just giving me medication and hoping the problem went away. A lot, like I'm taking like a very small window I have into the struggle of larger structural issues, and I'm broadening it beyond my own scope.
Right.
So there's a lot of like treatment options, especially there's like ABA therapy, ABA, which is specifically just it's used on a lot of autistic kids to get them not to improve the way they interact with the world, but to get them to stop outward signs of like whatever they're dealing with. And it just teaches them to internalize a lot of that. And a lot of Peter's injections and everything is sort of trying to find a cool sort of sci-fi way to really sort of illustrate that a lot of the treatment for children with autism that can progress into adulthood is not necessarily to teach them how to function with it, but to teach them how to be quieter about it, about not being able to function.
Well, and I definitely don't think this is an indictment on your childhood, but I do agree that like I think you have a very unique perspective that you got to play with the sci-fi world a little bit more because of the experiences you had. And I do appreciate the way you discuss these injections with Peter, because there are moments where like he's like, my injection made me do this. And I was like, oh, I love that he seems to have the understanding of what is him and what is the injection just working for him. And I found that like so fascinating, because I remember the first time I read it, I was like, oh, is this supposed to be like a play on like, well, what is like free will and what is what he thinks is like the injection? Does he get to excuse some of his behavior because of the injection? But it also seems like it's a little bit of both, where sometimes he's just like, oh, nope, that was definitely the injection because he knows the difference. And sometimes it's like also a way to hold him back and be like, I would be a lot more volatile without this, but it held me back. And it's almost like he wants to rely on that reasoning a little bit in his head as well. And it's playing with that different dynamic of his own like unreliable narration to see like what the difference is and when it's coming in and when he has an understanding versus when he's letting it be an excuse. It's very fascinating.
Oh, absolutely, Hannah, you nailed it, because I feel like that's how I saw it too, where the injections were more of just like they created like a dual point of view almost that Peter has. And you do see Peter kind of fall back into this state where it's like he knows that he consented to these things, but there's also possibly repercussions to that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that was fun to play with about the injections was it was a way to externalize a thing that I think a lot of people, at least I know, who are on medication or who have different kinds of cognitive dysfunction can sometimes deal with, where there's a lot of was that something I did, or was it something that I did because I have either this disorder or I'm on this medication and this is the side effect? Like how much of this is me, how much of this is the dysfunction, how much of this is the medication I'm on, and not necessarily there's a sort of depersonalization effect that can happen when you have all these things together. And that was a fun sort of way to externalize a lot of that struggle.
Well, and it was fun because you also, it's so unique because like he kind of talks with Ed at the beginning where he thinks like Ed looks down upon these injections because they put him up to Ed's level in certain like physical aspects, and he's like, oh, he thinks that that's unearned. But we also kind of see where like Ed's just concerned, where he's like, well, do you actually need these injections? Like, aren't you okay just as you are? And like, why do you think you need them? And I think that like that plays with the narrative a little bit more on these specifically, especially in sci-fi, where you get to have like these do give him a little bit of boost on physicality and being like, well, I didn't have to train to know how to use a sword anymore. Like that's just rote. But he also doesn't recognize like in giving himself these injections, he is losing other pieces to gain those aspects of himself. And like he doesn't, and you're right, it goes back to like Peter doesn't always give himself enough credit, and sometimes he gives himself too much credit. So it's an interesting dynamic to play with.
I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, I love that. And I also just love that we have a protagonist, if we can always call Peter protagonist. I'm unsure, because sometimes I'm like, Peter, you're ruining things. But I love having a protagonist that is autistic. I mean, that's amazing. We rarely get this kind of representation, and also someone that's allowed to just be authentically themselves and to be questioning things that help them or maybe harm them, or especially like social interactions that Peter has. I think it's great to see this representation.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I know that there's a lot of depictions of autism that I've seen over the years that sort of fall into a bit of a black or white category of either like it's a horrible burden that you have to deal with, or it's a sweet, innocent angel that could never hurt anyone because they're just so childlike. And a lot of the stories that I write involve people with autism just because I'm like, I want to see these motherfuckers making some mistakes.
Well, I also love that because you can see where sometimes his siblings have that look on him. Like, I feel like you showed an outlook of society about autistic people with the way like some of the siblings interact, where like Annoyce, is that the correct way to pronounce her name? I wasn't sure. Is it Annoyce?
It's a lot of this is like there's no wrong way to pronounce it. I do Anoise.
Okay,
but
I will say Annoyce.
Whatever your heart tells you.
But like Annoyce kind of almost like can infantilize him, and he's just like a playmate for her, where she's like, "Oh, look at you," and like, "I can't trust what you say, and I can't do this until you prove it to me." And she kind of does like see him a little bit beneath her. And then you have like Edgar, who's like more willing to like come at him as himself. And then you have like Desmond, who's like, no, you're a frustrating person to be around, like, and you're difficult. And that is just how it is. And I'm going to be honest about that. And so I do like you kind of played with the different siblings dynamics and like showing how people interact with autism sometimes to like good amounts and bad amounts. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it took so long to actually figure out how each one was navigating the relationships. Like at first, it was all too same. Like it was too much of the same. And then I would try to mix it up, but like it would feel weird. I was like, no, this is out of character. It took like so long to actually figure out like how to tailor it to each of them and each of their different perspectives on him, because I guess a lot of it was also figuring out how each of them. How each of the personalities interact with the world like outside of him, because that was how that was eventually how I cracked the code. I guess I have to characterize these people to figure out how his relationships with them are going to work.
That's amazing. I know we've talked about like your struggles with certain characters, but was there a character you felt yourself like struggle with most when you were trying to write them out on the page and be like, oh, I just can't get them like perfectly detailed yet?
I have to think. I think either Anoise or Edgar, probably. Anoise was so fucking bland for so long. I could not make her interesting for the longest time. She like a lot of the times I made her way too like she has some insecurities in the book, but I kept going back on making her too insecure for a while. Or she'd feel like too helpless or a bit infantilized in her own right. And eventually I sort of got around to real like sort of trying to grapple with how does she feel about the situation that's happening, and how is that going to express itself. And I was like, I need a bit more sort of signs of wrath in her to just sort of even things out. And that was sort of from there I started feeling like I was moving closer to the right direction for where I needed things to go with her. With Edgar, Edgar wasn't even in the book for the longest time. He was just an unseen force in the background for like, I had a whole 208,000 word draft where he was just never there. And I had to cut most of that draft in rewrites. And I think of that, I think maybe 50,000, 60,000 of that survived. And then I realized like, okay, this like, because the focus of the book was completely off. It was originally like romantic fantasy kind of thing with Peter had a love interest and everything. And I had to cut a lot of that and be like, no, the focus needs to be on these siblings. And I realized he had the journey back home in the original draft. But he made most of that journey alone and not much was happening. And a lot of early readers felt, I was like, this is really frustrating. Make something happen to him. And eventually I was like, okay, so if it's about the siblings, maybe this is how I bring in Edgar and everything. And a lot of that, there were a lot of like different ideas that I had floating around in various revisions before I figured out that I needed to cut that just later got incorporated in with that. To figure out who he was going to be, how he was going to be. At first, he had the same problem with Anoise where he was too bland, and then I had to go in and give him a few more personality traits, where because it starts with him keeping this secret from Peter, a lot of it ended up too vague or it wasn't fitting together cohesively enough. So I had to throw in extra little moments that sort of tease out this idea of like he's hiding something. There's other things that he's planning. or throwing in little bits of commentary about the other siblings. That is usually how I ended up cracking the code for how to characterize someone. It's like, how do they feel about the other three? Let's put a different perspective in there.
So as an author, I learned that you are not afraid to like punch us in the gut in terms of like the violence that can occur suddenly where we're like, what? No, stop, don't do that. And,
yeah.
Or in where I'm going with this, when we're talking about the Gaunts and learning more about them, I was just like, oh, this is really crushing to learn how they became what they are. And I was just kind of wondering what the process of writing them was and where you got the inspiration for the Gaunts.
The Gaunts have been around in my head for a while. I think I first came up with them shortly after I finished the first draft of Sword in the Street. I finished that around early 2020. And I had the idea for them. I was doing something completely different, and someone was talking. I feel like it might have been I was reading a different book and someone mentioned something about ghosts or ghost stories, and the thought came into my head of like, well, okay, so the classic depiction of a ghost is like this sort of sheet that's like floating through the air and everything. How are they, and like you can pass through them and everything. That would make them like a gas, right? Why don't you breathe in ghosts? And from there, it's just sort of like, okay, I can either make this into a comedy sketch or a world building thing. It's just sort of like, what happens when you breathe in a ghost? And that idea cropped up in a couple ideas that never went anywhere. There was a character in an idea that never had anything, that they breathed in the ghost of someone that was freezing, and that part went into the final thing. But originally that character was like some kind of professor at some sort of like sci-fi university, who was always wearing like 10 layers of clothing and was constantly freezing. I would occasionally shout things related to the ghost's PTSD or something like that. And like, I kept trying to find places to put that idea. That was like, it had been like floating out there for a while. And then the first thing I ever wrote for this book, I was sitting in a laundromat and trying to figure out something different than I was working on, when the idea of a cyborg horse, Peter on a cyborg horse going through this mist, came into my head, and I wrote it in my notes app actually. And some of the language of that first thing I wrote ended up in the book. I think it appears around the bit where they're coming on the cabin in like part 3. But I like the idea of like this sort of stuff that's floating out there. It's sort of semi-conscious, but ultimately powerless. And I was like, okay, this fits with the idea of powerlessness that's going on in this book. And then I can also use, because these people need masks, which, I also need to state, interrupting myself quickly for the record, I had the idea for gas masks before COVID. Right before COVID, like around February-ish of that year. Sword in the Street was with an editor. I was trying to work on something else to get my head out of it. I had this idea for people who have to wear gas masks because there's the ghost fog out there. And then suddenly COVID starts happening. Like, this is feeling too prescient. I don't know if I like this. So that was there before COVID. I'm not making any specific commentary about COVID. That had been there beforehand.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Matar was telling us to mask up long before COVID.
COVID was my fault. I'm so sorry. That was a bit of a whoopsie. I made that into being. I was gifted with Apollo's gift of prophecy.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
No, but it was a lot of it came from a couple different ideas, and then I realized that because of the things you need to protect yourself and the expensiveness of creating that, I could also use it to comment on various structural inequalities that these people have to deal with, and just the absolute catastrophe that any kind of mass scale war or conflict will create, where it's like a war is not just a war in this world, it is a natural disaster. And in the next book, characters will either have to reckon with a natural disaster or find ways around mass casualty events in pursuit of whatever goals they need.
So I, as someone who's terrified of ghosts, I didn't realize I had to have the fear of breathing them in. But now I know.
You're welcome for that.
I have a deep-seated fear of ghosts, well known on the podcast. So when I was starting to read this book, I was like, Laura picked a book about ghosts for us to read. But then it was a very unique experience to read about the Gaunts and like how I loved the section where Peter kind of talks about like, how does he know who a Gaunt is? Because he's like, oh, you just have to know, like you have to have a bunch of things going on in your head and a weird determination at the end. And I loved that because it was just such a specific view of like fantasy and how to work with like ghost gas and people reading it in. And like, it was just very fascinating. And I
also love
impressed.
Desmond's reaction to that because Desmond's just like, I know, but could you please just tell me? Because this would be really helpful if I could just know. Like, you're not giving me a good answer.
Yeah. Oh, Desmond was so much fun to write during that whole sort of road trip sequence.
He was very good.
Mm-hmm. The interactions with them are very funny. But there's also, we just go back to the very beginning of the book. This is major spoilers, but we've been talking for quite a while, so I think it's okay.
Major spoilers from the book coming on from now. Well, everything we've tried to keep it relatively vague.
Spoiler corner.
So right at the beginning, we see Peter getting injections, and there's a lot of funny banter that's happening. But right after the injections, he's got to like hurry back to his chambers to get ready because he's gonna meet Edgar. But he's having a hard time moving, and I don't know why, but I was picturing like a Princess Bride-esque situation where it's like, like kind of flopping limbs around, like, why aren't these working?
Oh my god!
I don't know why. That's immediately where my mind went.
I never made that connection before, but I'm so glad you did. That makes me so happy.
It was so comedic to me that I was like, okay, I don't know if this is supposed to be funny, but I'm getting a lot of enjoyment out of this because just Peter like being so like sarcastic and witty throughout like the injection process and like all of his little remarks that he's making, and then that process getting back there, just like, what is happening?
I had so much fun with that section. That was one of the bits that actually came the easiest to me. I wrote that was the first thing I wrote for draft 2. That Avram didn't exist before draft 2, and then I needed some way to set up the original 4, like the 4 quadruplets, and build the world. And so I realized, okay, Peter needs to explain this to someone. And originally it was just gonna be someone he had to explain this to, but then he was just so much fun. Like Peter bounced off of him like easier than he had with any other character I'd written thus far. And then I just needed more room for him. So I was like, let's give this whole injection sequence. That's gonna be fun. He'll make a bunch of sex jokes. That'll be great. And I just kept trying to find places to fit him in because he was just so much fun to write.
I also pretty much enjoyed that like Monders is like throughout the book, he is very important to Peter. We see that through like how he talks about him, how he treats him, and like he does very much enjoy this man, but everyone else around him is like, that old creep, why are you around him? Like it's definitely a play on like the younger man and like the older gentleman where it's like, why are you two hanging out so much? This is really weird. Like
the guy that harvested bodies, that's
right, exactly. Oh yeah, that was so great. I had so much fun with that.
It was amazing. I love Peter's take on everything. And you're right. There's so many like comedic moments in this book where you'll have like one of the worst, most like horrifying moments in the world. And then Peter's just like cracking jokes. And then even at the end, like Desmond, it starts doing it. And Peter's like, could you please stop it? And he's like, we have to cut the tension somehow. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's like,
oh yeah, no, I really, Peter as a narrator has been in my head since like 2013. I guess, holy shit, that's been 10 years. Fuck. I think he started off as like originally the first time he came into my head was in a story that was basically a ripoff of Percy Jackson that I wrote when I was 17.
Been there.
And that influenced a lot of the ways that he would the ways he narrated. And then he'd slip into various other stories I was writing as I got older. And by the time I got to this, I sort of realized, okay, this is someone who's like of the opinion that as long as he's not taking something seriously, then what's happening isn't that serious. And that seemed like just a really fun way to write a book where a lot of horrifying things happen, but I didn't want it to be like, I needed that to hit emotionally, but I didn't want it to be so dark that it got like bleak. And so that emotion was that humor was a really, really effective way in a number of occasions to potentially like lower the temperature on something both as like a character choice to establish the kind of person this is, but also make for less of a horrifying read than I would have otherwise been. Well, or sometimes it just gets weird, like with the cyborg horse halfway through.
We've talked about how Peter's train of thought is something that I adore, but you specifically mentioning like how the comedy has to play into some of these bleak moments. Since we're in the spoiler section, there's a particularly gory scene involving Edgar and Peter, and Peter's like train of thought through this, where he's like, I feel like I could throw up. I'm not going to, but I feel like it. Why am I crying? When did I start crying?" It adds a lot of levity to the situation, because when this started happening, I'm going, no, don't do it. No.
Yeah.
It happens.
No, that scene is that was one of my favorites. I had so much fun with that. Like I needed all the horrific elements to be just the worst possible thing. I remember just like getting to right in line, like I couldn't tell which angle was his elbow or something like that, and just being like, I need a minute. I can't even think of a funny thing to say now. Just like, and because everything was so horrific and gruesome in that, I was like, okay, now I need to make the comedic shit. I need that to hit. The contrast is because I figured, I was like, if I do this right, if I do this wrong, it's going to be horrible. Like this is gonna be just the weirdest fucking scene. No one's gonna be able to take it seriously. But if I can get that if I can nail the contrast, it's gonna be one of the best scenes in the book.
It was one of the best scenes in the book.
Definitely memorable.
Yeah, it was so memorable, and like I feel it's so interesting to see that, because it was very jarring, because like throughout this all we kind of see like Edgar throughout this keeps being like, I want you here because I love you so much and I just want a sibling, and I've like been cut off from the family. He's like, I just need someone to support, and like, you know what that's like to need the support and not get it, so could you just be here for me, please? And like at every moment Peter's like, no, I can't, I'm sorry, I really have to get to the family that actually matters right now, like you're in the wrong, I need to go. And so like that moment was also just heartbreaking on a psychological level, where it's like Edgar's just reaching out to Peter for love, support, and help. And now he's losing his arm, and he still loves him and wants him to stay. But he's like, yeah, it would be great if I could, but I can't. So I have to go.
Yeah. And then he's like, but do you have a way back? Is somebody going to come help you? And he's like, somebody's probably coming. Just get out of here.
Like, I kept going back to that sequence because originally it was very straightforward. And then I would be writing something else and be like, oh no, he has to smoke something right now to chill or something that he needs to, that's going to be such a great little diversion from the moment. And then I'd write something else, and then I'd be like, no, wait, okay. He needs to be making fun of him as he's cutting off his arm or something like that. Like, as he's using his dad's knife, right? Oh, he should recognize it. Okay. And I'm just like going back to that scene every couple of days to add something else. I add like a new layer to that sequence. Because it was just there was just so many different ways I could have thought of to make it work on a new level.
Well, and throughout this book, Peter has like the worst case of main character energy I've ever seen in a main character.
Yeah.
Where like during a scene where he has to like chop off his brother's arm, like, yes, it is very traumatizing, but the brother is like, could you just focus on me and my feelings right now? Because I'm about to lose an arm. And could you like sit with me for a second? And he's like, I really can't. It really has to be about me right now. I'm so sorry. I wish it were different. And then like when Desmond hasn't slept all day and Desmond's like in the thick of it, and he's like, I've never been in the action. I was always protected. I always had something. I've always been pampered. Like, I do not have the capability to do this. Could you just talk to me for a while? And Peter's like, but am I the best person to do that for you right now?
I really don't think that's my job.
He has like the biggest bout of like, I wish I could, but I can't. I'm so sorry.
Literally, no, he's such an attention whore in every scene that he's in. That's part of why he makes such an effective main character, but also he goes through life thinking he's the main character and not necessarily noticing how much that's the horrible situation that's putting other people in.
And that's like, you hear it because you're right. Like Desmond is the voice of reason, where he has to like come to Peter and he's like, 5 years ago, you ran out on all of us. And you keep talking about like the duty of being a prince, but you got to walk away from that situation for years. And like, now you're mad at us when all of this stuff is going on without you. And Peter's like, but you just won't tell me things. You
guys keep beating around the bush. I need to know.
Oh, that rant was one of the most cathartic things I think I've ever written. And that was, I didn't really figure out the ethos of who Desmond was as a person until like, it surprised me. Like I didn't know it was coming until I started writing it. I didn't even know how it was going to end until I typed the last word. And I was like, oh, well, now you tell me.
I love that.
I'm gonna go back and like work in this ethos elsewhere, man. You're really holding out on me.
That's fascinating. And that's like, I think Edgar also has Edgar's tried to hint it to him earlier in the book where he's like, hey man, like we all love you because you got to step away. And that is a very big privilege you got. And he's like, nope, you guys are all just lying to me. It's so fascinating to see him interact with each of these siblings. So,
oh, so much fun.
So going forward into the next book, what characters can we expect to see more of, and what technology can we expect to see more of? Because we get glimpses into what the lab coats are doing and what their mom is doing, but we're kind of a little unsure exactly what is going on. Can you give us any hints as to what we can expect going forward?
I can make no promises that anything I say will make it into the final product, because the way I write, like I talked about, writing a 208,000 word draft and cutting everything but 60,000 words of that. So a lot of my process is I will write something and I'll think, okay, I got it. And then a week later, I'm like, fuck, okay, only 10% of that is actually anything. And then I have to build a new book around that 10%. And I'm like, okay, I think I have a better idea where things need to go now. And then a week later, it's like, fuck, okay, 50% of that. I can keep 50%. And the next I'm keeping 70%. And the next, finally I get it down. So I'm in the middle of that process now where I'm on, I think, my third draft. The first time I cut more than anything I've ever cut before in my life. I wrote 50,000 words and I kept at most 10,000.
Oh my gosh.
So what you're saying is you're the like epitome of a pantser over a plotter.
Oh no, I plot. That's the tragic thing. I have, my outlines are 30,000 words long.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh.
And then the actual book goes by in like a month because it's just that extensively outlined. It's the weirdest fusion of outlining and pantsing because I do both very quickly without thinking through the practical implications of anything I'm writing about. And only once I finish it do I go back and be like, okay, now let's think this through.
That's amazing. Wow, that's fascinating.
So basically, you're saying that we can't, if you could tell us some things that are going to be in the next book, but we should not trust them.
Yes, basically. I have a good idea. There are some things that I have a good idea of, like this is gonna be in the next book. There's some things I'm more confident about, but could also get cut, as far as I know. So I'm trying to think.
There's a civil war coming, it seems like. We're about to have a civil war happen. So
yeah, there's some...
And you don't have to reveal any of your secrets.
There's a really good, I'm not going to say what the plot twist is, but there's a moment, the reason I had to cut 90%, I will get to actually some of the stuff in the book in a minute, I promise. I'm sort of dancing around that, I know. There's the reason I had to cut 90% of that first draft was because I was brainstorming. I wrote the original first draft, and then I think I was trying to figure out, I knew it didn't work, but I couldn't figure out why. And I was brainstorming with Krystle Matar, I think. Because I was like, I don't know why it doesn't work, so I'm just gonna yell at you about it until I figure it out. You don't need to say anything, but there was some back and forth, and just like they were asking me leading questions and stuff so I could try and figure out what was happening. And there's a specific development that I was like, it's like this thing that's in the background for a while, and then it comes in, and then Peter finds out about it in the last third. And it's on the back burner, but it feels like it should be much more of a main concern. And if this thing is happening this whole time, I don't see why these people wouldn't do this thing. And holy shit, wait a minute, that's the book. That's what needs to happen. That's not a plot hole, that's the plot. What have I been doing?
That's amazing. Well, we cannot wait to read it. Do you know how many books are going to be in this series? Like, I know that this was book 1, but do you have is it a trilogy? Is it a 4? I assumed it was 4 books. I don't know why. I think it's because there are 4 children.
The title,
but
I think the title usually throws people off. I have, as far as I'm aware, I think there are going to be 3 books. I should probably say some of the stuff that's going to be in the next one. I just realized I never got to that. There's going to be much more of Fabian and Peter. There's going to be a lot of development on that front. There's a really, really fun halfway point thing. So it's sort of like with the halfway point with the chase scene and the horses and everything. It's like that, but a lot bigger and a huge twist. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to involve basically the entire cast, and it's really, really great. Awesome. I have it outlined. I haven't written it yet, but I really hope I can keep it. I really hope I'm on the right track with that one, because it's such a juicy concept and a bunch of really great scenes. There's this is one thing that I don't know if is going to actually make it into the final product, but I do have a piece of tech that's I'm bringing ships and boats into this, and I have I brought this over from a novella that never went anywhere, where I had something in the ship that was called a heartbeat engine, and I didn't know what it meant until eventually there's a scene where they have to get down to the engine. I'm like, oh, this is like a giant, massive heart the size of a room that's like pumping blood and oil into the veins of the ship. It's alive? Okay, cool. It's covered in scales and shit. There are like ribs in the hallways and stuff like that. And every now and then it needs like these weird injections to keep it going. I have an idea. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to act on it, but I have an idea of like a fight scene on a catwalk over the heart, and there's just these valves winking underneath them.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's such a fun sequence, and I really hope I get to keep it in. It's going to appear somewhere eventually, because I'm in love with the concept of this ship, and I need this ship to be in something in this world, and hopefully it can make it into this draft.
If it doesn't get kept, can you just email it to us?
I can email you guys anything you want. There's a ton of cut scenes that if you want to see it, I can just email that to you.
We're always happy to read more of these books, because I do think this book is so good. For people who haven't read it yet, make sure you're going to pick it up, because it has the perfect meld of world building where you're like, oh, I need to know everything, and plot and intrigue with the sibling dynamics and everything in between. So you did such a good job of giving everyone exactly what they want in a sci-fi fantasy. It's brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Really agree.
But it's also currently right now listed as a participant in Spiffbo.
Yeah. Tell us about Spiffbo a little bit and your experience with it.
This is my second time doing Spiffbo. The first time was with Sword in the Street, which made it to semifinals. I learned afterwards, and by afterwards I mean literally a couple months ago, that there was one judge who wanted it as a finalist, but got outvoted. They're like, I thought that one was going to be the finalist. I don't know if I'm just out of an abundance of caution, I'm not going to name names, and also I was in Kirsten's group, Red Skies, and she deserved that spot way more. That's a really good book, and everyone should check it out. My first time in that contest, I joined the same year I was connecting with the indie scene. I talked about this on a roundtable a couple of days ago, but it was the first round was much more difficult, I think, for me, because I was learning how to just be an author and exist in this space and be like it was my first time. It was not only my first time in the contest and wondering how things were going to go, but it was also I was experiencing the idea of oh, that friend of mine sold this many copies, I only sold that. and being like, wait a minute, that's an unhealthy cycle of emotion. I need to figure that out. I can't be comparing myself. That's not going to end well. So I was having to figure out that for the first time ever, at the same time as I was in the contest. And a lot of that compounded. It wasn't particularly like, I wouldn't call it unpleasant, because a lot of these were thoughts that were on like the back burner for a while. I thought about the contest way more, at least in the first few months that I can compare to in 7, to the point where there's actually, when I found out I was a finalist, was because I think I was like about to leave the house to do something else, and I got a text from, I think, Krystle Matar, who I saw I had a notification in the Spiffbo Discord. And then immediately after, Krystle Matar was like, you should check the Discord. And I was like, yeah, I know, I got cut. It's fine, I'll check it in a sec. I gotta go do it. And they're like, and then in all caps, I just get, Connor, you should check the Discord. You should go look. And I was like, what?
Oh, that's so exciting.
So I'm hoping this time I'm going into it now with most of the time I'm much calmer about it. Most of the time I just don't think about it. I'm a lot more blasé, but especially because this book is doing a lot better than the last book. I still think it'd be cool to be a finalist, but like I'm not gonna complain. But like it's doing well enough that like and I've gotten past the initial sort of like entry into just this space. So I'm not like in a space where I'm comparing myself to others. I'm not really worried about how much I'm selling at this point. I'm in a much better position mentally to prepare for the contest. So I don't think about it too much. Every now and then there's a lot of ideation that comes with it. I think I don't want to speak for other people, but I kind of assume other people do this too, where they're like, what if I was a finalist? So
I feel like that's natural to assume like that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's
like,
a group of authors who are all sitting there together being like, I put this out. So they're going to have
and are extremely anxious because they're like, I've worked so hard on
It's
this.
The same way like when you're querying, you're like, what if I won a Hugo Award? Or like you're visualizing yourself like doing some kind of interview like Neil Gaiman or something like that. Like,
right.
This is what I would say.
I'm talking to Netflix tomorrow about my new series.
Yes. Here's who I will cast in this book. Like, right, exactly. So there's that. I will occasionally have bouts of hyperfixation where I'm in Becky M's group, and like every now and then I'll be like, okay, it's time to look at everything she's ever done for Spiffbo. I will be taking notes. I didn't actually take notes. It's like there's a moment where like I remember watching one video and she's like, this is science fantasy, and it was like, oh, so she doesn't immediately scratch sci-fi elements off the list. That means I have a chance. That's horrible, because now I can't rely on getting cut for the sake of my mental health.
Oh no. No, I think, I mean, Spiffbo, for people who don't know much about it, it's self-published fantasy blog off. There are 300 books this year, I believe.
Every year there are 300 books.
Every year there are 300 books, 10 people reviewing all the books, and they get certain sections that they read through and pick certain ones to move forward. And then there's usually a winner at the end of it, or there is a winner at the end of it. So it's a very interesting contest. It's huge in the self-published world. Laura and I have like seen it for the past couple of years that we've been doing the pod.
It does a really good thing because it draws attention to a lot of these self-published books. And like I've come across several just by like this year by reading through like previous entrants and current entrants. And I've bought too many books. And thank you, Spiffbo, for ruining my bank account. But
yeah, it's so good because it helps.
Can do a lot for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad that this book is a participant this year. It's good that you feel a little bit better going into this contest, because I know it can weird some people out throughout it. We've heard some different things. So it's always nice to hear that you're going in with clear eyes, full heart. Is that it? Clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. So that's awesome. But
we're rooting for you. We love this book.
Thank you.
So
this book appreciate that.
Is amazing. Everyone go pick it up and read it now. It's one of the most
find
unique books.
All of Connor's other work, The Sword in the Street is their other book, and check out everything that they've written and that they're doing.
Because you have done amazing things. And could you tell people where to find those books and where to find you on the social media platforms?
You can find me usually I'm on Twitter the most. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. It's all at the CM Caplan. You can find the book on Amazon And the physical book you can find in like Barnes and Noble, or I think Silverstone's recently picked it up. A lot of like the paperback you can get in various sort of like other bookstores, not like physical bookstores, but like on the online retail sites. There's also the audiobook for The Fall Is All There Is coming out hopefully next week. I don't have an exact date because all I know is I've hit publish on the audiobook, and the Audible team is reviewing it, which could take up to 10 days. And I did that on the 8th, so it's been like however many business days between the 8th and today. So hopefully sometime next week that's coming out.
And who's the narrator?
Scott Fleming.
Okay.
He did a phenomenal job. It's incredible.
Awesome.
He's a lovely British man who's really just captures the intensity of a lot of Peter's narration.
That's amazing. And everyone should go out and get the audiobook because I honestly want to listen to it already.
Yeah.
So
I'd be really curious to see this
for that
out
on TikTok as well. So
well,
just
guys,
to plug that again.
Yes. Make sure you guys are going out and buying the book, and make sure you're reviewing it on, Goodreads or StoryGraph, because those are all very helpful platforms to get the message out for your books. And thank you so much, Connor, for coming on to discuss.
But before
this
we leave,
us.
What are you reading and watching or enjoying so we don't forget?
Oh, right. Reading. I am reading The Fox by Sherwood Smith. I have it right here.
Oh, yes.
Sarah from Fiction Fans has made me read. It was like, if I buy you a copy of Inda, do you promise to read it? And I was like, yes. Okay. As long as you get me a copy, because I don't know if I'm gonna like it or not. And I read it and I loved it. I was living in her house at the time, so every now and then I'd just like emerge from a room and just be like, what the fuck just happened? And now I am way overdue. I promised I was going to read the second book, but then I had to read a bunch of other books beforehand. But I'm 100 pages into this book, and it's huge. It's a brick, and I have not been able to read it in too long because of a move that I had to do. I have barely gotten any reading done, but I'm excited to jump back into that.
That's so exciting.
I thought you were going to say that like you came across certain things in the plot and you were just like, what? And then you like go out in Sarah's kitchen and like mess things up. Like, why trying to make me read this?
I would like go out there and be like, I really love this aspect of this character. I think the plot's going to go in this direction. And wait, they died? What do you mean? They were my
Sarah's like, where's my couch tipped over?
It was insane. There were moments where I'd be like, this is my favorite character. And Sarah would just look at me, blank faced, knowing they died, and tell me nothing.
Oh no. All of a sudden, Sarah,
like,
you're like keeping.
So betrayed. You knew they were gonna die in 200 pages, and you let me find that out on my own.
And you did nothing about it. It's like all of a sudden Sarah comes
stop
home.
It. You should have emailed Sherwood Smith personally to get her to fix this.
Sarah's pugs are missing, and you're like, you'll get them back when I see fit.
You can have Mr. Squeak, where you had
Squeak
Sherwood Smith on the podcast. You have her number, I'm sure.
Get her on him
Mr. Squeak
now.
Daily page on Twitter has changed drastically, and we don't know why.
Well, make sure you're picking up those books because they sound excellent, but don't get too attached to any of the characters.
Yes.
Yeah.
And make sure you're picking up The Sword in the Street and The Fall Is All There Is. I hope I just said those right. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you said it.
One.
Okay. Sometimes I just say book names and I'm like, wait, was that the actual title or did I miss some prepositional phrases? Because that just happens all the time. But
you got it. You did great.
But again, thank you for joining us to discuss this book.
So much,
we
Connor.
enjoyed it in the conversation
Thank you
so
for
much.
having me. This was so much fun.
And everyone join us next week as we move back into Peeking at the Greenbone Saga, part 1 of Jade War. So speaking of books where you shouldn't get too attached to any character.
Trust no one.
Trust no one. They're going to disappoint you. It's just going to happen. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.